fundsupermart.com.
Hi, what is the outlook for Asian small to mid-cap companies for the next 2 to 3 years?
It's actually quite difficult to talk about an outlook for Asia Japan small caps in any generic sense, given that it's a very diverse sector. You've got around 1,600 companies within the index alone. So obviously some of those companies have a very positive outlook, some of them not so positive. It's been the received wisdom that small caps are a high beta play. That's been the general perception in the market, that they outperform in rising markets, that they underperform in falling markets, and that therefore you'd only want to look to go into small caps in Asia if you had a positive view on the markets. Now actually, if you look at the historical data, that isn't necessarily the case. If we look over the last 10 years on an annualised basis, small caps have only behaved in that pro-cyclical manner about half the time. So it's not even really a case of making a market call in terms of the outlook for small caps over the next 2 to 3 years. For us, it really comes down to bottom-up stock selection. It comes down to finding individual companies that have a niche of some sort or have a competitive edge in the market that will provide sustainable opportunities to grow profitability and to grow earnings over the next few years. And then if you can combine that with good valuations, and if you can combine that with a relative lack of knowledge in the market about this company, that becomes an enormously powerful combination. And the good news is we're finding quite a few stocks like that at the moment.
Are there any sectors or geographical regions within Asia that will be most favourable for small to mid-cap companies?
Yeah, the way we invest is on a bottom-up basis. So we don't really take a top-down view of the market and say, okay, we think this particular sector or country has a great outlook for small caps, so let's look for opportunities there. We work the other way. So we start at the bottom and we look for companies that have those characteristics that I mentioned before, the good valuation, the relative lack of knowledge in the market about them, and the opportunity to grow earnings and to grow profitability on a sustainable basis. So what you find though is that quite often these companies can be clustered in certain areas at any particular point in time. So at the moment, for example, we're finding one of these clusters within the Chinese textile industry. Now this, quite often Asian small caps are seen as a way of playing the new structural story in Asia. And this obviously doesn't come under that heading because Chinese textiles as a sector, as an industry, has been around for a long, long time. The crucial thing is that it has been very unloved for the last few years. Obviously, it is a sector that became very competitive, where lots of new companies entered that market, competed away the profits, at the same time as you had strong competition coming out of ASEAN with a lower cost structure. So this has been an unloved sector, but what you're finding now is that having gone through a reconstruction, having gone through some consolidation in that sector, you're starting to see the winners emerging now. And the winners have taken a lot of market share. Quite often they have actually diversified their production base between China and ASEAN so as to take advantage of the cheaper costs coming through there. And you're finding now that actually there's some really strong companies with great potential for earnings growth, a lot of that driven by incremental improvement in the US, which aren't really known by the market because the market has fallen so out of love with this sector that there's not many analysts covering it. So that's one area that we're finding a lot of opportunity. A second is in alternative energy. So it's obviously a trend at the moment right across the world to diversify away from fossil fuel-based forms of energy. And so we're seeing, particularly in China, where they've got the stated goal of moving from around 13% energy production through alternative means today through to about 27% by 2020. So this is going to provide enormous opportunities for solar power, for wind, for gas power generation. And you're finding quite a few small cap companies which are involved in these areas, which have some sort of niche within these areas, and are very well set for growth over the next few years.
Small to mid-cap companies have traditionally been thought of as a higher risk investment. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. They are a high-risk investment in certain respects. Now, you're talking about companies that are in new sectors quite often, where you don't know what the proven business model looks like there, or a successful business model looks like in those sectors yet. Secondly, you're talking about companies that quite often don't have a long track record. They haven't been around for a long time. So there is less ability to assess the quality of the management and their ability to deliver on their targets and to deliver their strategy. And thirdly, you're talking about companies that quite often have a reliance on one particular product or one particular service. And they may have a niche within that area, but as the market changes, they may lose that edge. And that is what their entire business is based on. So there are certainly risks associated with small caps that you don't find necessarily with blue chips or something like that, for example. But in terms of, sort of broad market directional risks, as I said, we don't think that's as cut and dried as the conventional wisdom would have it. The only time that you absolutely don't want to be exposed to small caps is when you've got bear markets driven by systemic crises. So where small caps have underperformed by a huge amount in recent history has been the period from the Asian financial crisis through to the tech wreck. And then also during the global financial crisis during 2008. Small caps massively outperformed in those two periods. However, in other markets where the market has just been range-bound, or even when you've had some declines but they haven't been driven by those really critical systemic issues, small caps haven't necessarily underperformed in those markets. So as I said, for us it really comes down to looking at the individual companies and looking at how they are likely to be affected by what's going on in the market. And we're looking for those companies that are more or less sensitive to market movements depending on what's going on at the time.
Thank you.